Part 1, Resurrection Day 1.
I saw our boy. The thought ran through John's mind on an endless loop. For 13 hours, he could think of nothing other than the face of that child standing on the side of the road. He had driven past the tattered remains of the Rathskeller Motel countless times on the way to his son's final resting place. It had always stood as a reminder of times past when small towns could bring paying customers to roadside motels. Doors swung from single hinges, battering the remains of the motel's facade. Visible through the front windows was the foyer, now covered in shards of glass from the chandelier that had once hung from the ceiling near the check-in desk. Every few years, a new set of pubescents, with fear in their hearts and adventure on their minds, would fall victim to those shards as they bravely explored the remains of the foyer and its adjoining rooms. The Rathskeller had not seen a paying customer since 1986 and had been condemned just 3 years later, a victim of changing times and changing faces. On that day, what John saw on Route 1 in Fairweather, Virginia, was not the crumpled remains of a local inn, as he had seen so many times before. The Rathskeller was often a part of that stretch of road that John would drive with thoughtless abandon, drifting without conscious recognition of surroundings or memories of just how the journey transpired. From almost a mile off, John saw the neon lights reverberating on the trees that line the forest east of the Rathskeller lot. The darkness of the early morning highlighted the glow that came from the Rathskeller's exterior lights. Where the rusted sign had once hung at an odd angle, there now resided an absurdly oversized LED display reading the Rathskeller Motel in sparkling Technicolor. By pure instinct, John slowed the car down as he approached the overly lit, newly remodeled building. The day before, the lot had been dead, a silent and dark memory just off of Fairweather's main drag. This morning, however, the lot was lit up like a new attraction from the Vegas Strip, beckoning all for a good time at a high price. Each light outside of the 15 small rooms shone brightly, showcasing evenly hinged doors that were freshly painted and numbered. Walls were reconstructed. The roof was spotlessly shingled. The parking lot, which had just yesterday been choked with weeds and broken asphalt, was paved, lined, and sealed, reflecting back the artificial light. The Rathskeller no longer looked condemned, destined to an eventual destruction by city code or Mother Nature. On this morning, the Rathskeller looked open for business. It was in the glow from the building's main sign that John first saw the boy's face. Though overtly pale and emotionless, he could not have mistaken his slightly hooked nose and emerging cleft chin. The nose had come from the boy's mother, the chin from John himself. As John inched closer and the light ran away the remaining shadows on the boy's features, it became abundantly clear. The 7-year-old that stood slumped-shouldered on the side of the road, holding a sign that read, "The Rathskeller Motel, where family is everything," had not aged a day since his funeral, nor had he changed out of his coffin clothes. 13 hours later, John mustered up the courage to pick up the phone. He felt his heart rate increase to a dizzying pace, and on the third ring, his wife of 15 years answered. "Why are you calling me at this hour, John?" I... Get on with it," Maggie said. "I've got an early morning, and Maggie, I need you to listen," John sputtered, not letting her finish her thought. "I saw our boy."
2. His death had been a slow and creeping thing, like clotting blood escaping a healing wound. The cancer had appeared just 3 months after his 6th birthday, racking Ethan's brain with pain and delirium. Within days of the first signs of symptoms, he had been diagnosed stage 4, 9 months to live. In what seemed like a matter of moments, white picket fences were exchanged for white lab coats and white walls. It was in those 9 months that John and Maggie had begun to hate each other. Their marriage, though by no means a perfect picture of mutual devotion, had been solidly grounded before the cancer came. Now, that foundation was eroded more and more with every gasping breath of their 6-year-old son. John visited Ethan every day without fail. For him, there was no other option, no possible reason to stay at home or go to work. He relished the moments in those hospital rooms when he could hear his son laugh and talk, when he could see him smile. It was in those moments at Ethan's bedside that it was almost as if the cancer had not won. Even in the last weeks and days, as Ethan was often completely unresponsive, John drove the 27 minutes to St. Mary's Children's Hospital and held the hand of a boy whose pulse was beating, yet growing weaker each day. Maggie simply could not bear the visits, the hospital rooms, all different in number but identical in every other imaginable way, especially in their stench of death. The doctors, who spoke of her son's deteriorating health as if it was this weekend's weather, the ever-changing appearance of her little boy, who over time would lose his hair and gain the sunken eyes of an almost corpse. Maggie had loved her son, and she could not bear to see him waste away. So she fled. John grew to hate Maggie's infrequent visits, as he quickly began to doubt her love for their son. He came to believe, after 3 months before that last day, that Maggie was a coward, defeated by the cancer long before it had killed her son. Maggie, on the other hand, grew bitter as she became invisible. The months wore on, and she found herself quite often alone in a house made for 3, searching for any way to take her mind off of the boy in the hospital bed that had resembled her son. In a way, she was jealous of Ethan, as day by day he stole her husband away from her. John had never loved her that way, had never looked at her the way that he looked every day at that dying boy in the hospital bed. But by the end of Ethan's 9 months of torturous death, the marriage of John and Maggie had also met an end. At the funeral, John stood by the casket for the entire service, peering down through tears that came in patternless flurries. Once the casket was closed, Maggie joined him. They held hands, echoing empty sentiments and thanking family and friends for their presence. Neither of them, however, were present themselves. John was with his son, and Maggie was far away, each of them exactly where they needed to be. 3. 57 days had passed since the funeral. For 57 days, at exactly 6:45 a.m., John made the drive to Blandford Cemetery before work. The commute had become routine, a mindless exercise the likes of brushing teeth or combing hair. Over the last few years, the city of Fairweather had fallen on hard economic times, making it difficult to find the funds to pay for the cemetery's maintenance. The landscaper had been the last to be let go, and since then, the upkeep of each plot had been left to the families of the deceased. Most of the plots had been left untouched for the last 2 years, forgotten by those who had loved and lost. Ethan's plot, however, was immaculate. Any person visiting that plot would find fresh flowers, manicured grass, and a polished gravestone. Ethan's graveside only had one visitor, and he was the florist, the landscaper, and the granite man. Every morning, John drove down Route 1, passing mostly trees, farms, and fields. The 20-minute trek ended with a right turn into the cemetery, guarded by a rusted arch that had been erected after the boneyard's namesake, circa 1922. The lack of maintenance was apparent from the roadside, as chaotic yet beautiful weeds wound their way through the arch and its accompanying fences, sprouting flowers in seemingly patternless patches. Past the arches, the road split into a fork, creating a circle around the entirety of Blandford's considerable acreage. Dozens of single-lane roads weaved through the plots that filled the circle. Ethan's plot lay on the right side of the cemetery, 6 roads back amongst the dead. Today was different. The usual adornment of flowers that John had brought daily to the graveside had been replaced by an overused spade shovel. He stared at the ground in front of him with confused yet determined eyes. John imagined that he saw marks in the plot where someone had dug up his son and then refilled the dirt. As outlandish as it sounded to him, he knew what he had seen as he drove by the Rathskeller the day before. He had seen his son, dressed in the clothes in which he was buried. Now he would dig until he came to either an empty casket or a rotting son. Both possibilities would turn his world upside down, exposing him as either insane or the father of a dead boy walking. He did not know which he desired more. All he knew was that he had to know. That morning, however, John didn't have to dig any graves to receive his answer. As he raised the shovel to thrust it into the plot before him, his eye caught hold of a small, rectangular piece of paper. It was taped in a crude fashion to the top right corner of Ethan's gravestone. John tossed the shovel to the side and leaned down to read the business card that had been placed on 15 gravestones throughout the cemetery. Its front read, "The Rathskeller Motel, where family is everything." Shaking, John flipped the card over. On the back, in small, italic letters, was the message, "Come see us soon." Leaving the shovel beside the grave that no longer housed his son, John stumbled back to his car, steadied his shaking hands, and forced the keys into the ignition. He paused, ever so briefly, taking in the business card's message one more time before he pulled back onto Route 1 and headed towards the bright lights of the Rathskeller Motel, where he knew he would find his son.